Hello, and welcome to the European Exchange episode on road mapping to overcome VAT data and reporting challenges. My name is Neela Hirani, and I'm joined by Peter Borhoff today, and Ellen Dahl from Vertex, and Danielle Jansen from Thermo Fisher. Before we begin, I'd like to make some announcements. Please note the audio option available to you in your invitation. You can listen through your computer or telephone. If you prefer to use the telephone audio, please review your confirmation for dial-in details. All phone lines have been muted, so please direct all your comments and or questions to the Q&A module, and we will try and address them at the end as time permits. Please also note that we will be sending you the recording of the webinar today for your reference. So let us begin with the presentation. I will now hand you over to Peter.
Yeah, thanks, Neela. I'm Peter Borhoff. I'm the VAT director with Vertex, and I'm monitoring and assessing the implications of global VAT trends and developments, and assess the impact on our products and our customers. So over to you, Ellen.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Ellen van Daal. I work for Vertex as a solutions engineer, and that means I'm typically running the product demonstrations, also for our compliance solution that we will discuss today. And I'm looking forward to today's webinar, explaining more about the compliance solution that Thermo Fisher is using. Dan, would you like to go next?
Yeah. Hello everybody, my name is Dan Jansen, working as a Senior Manager Indirect Tax for Thermo Fisher. I've been with the company for about 4 years after Thermo Fisher had acquired another company in the Netherlands. And in the company I report into the European corporate tax team, and typically work on all kinds of projects, M&A projects, but also of course technology, and that's why I'm here in the call today to comment on aspects of that.
Yeah, hi Dan. I'm happy that you were able to join us in this webinar and share some of your experiences, especially with respect to compliance, which can be quite challenging. And one of the first things that I would like to discuss with you is, okay, what were your compliance challenges and your key drivers for change?
Well, I guess if I look back, then recently there were two main drivers worthwhile to mention. One main driver was the change to regulatory changes, especially making tax digital back in 2019. And we knew we had to go and look for a compliance solution that had an API, an application programming interface. In some countries, we already had some experience with tax return preparation software, but most returns were still prepared the old-fashioned way. So via ERP tax reports that are tweaked in Excel and keyed into a government portal. So a manual process. But now for the UK, we really needed to train people, start thinking in terms of linking data flows with clear audit trails, uploads into an API. And of course, they had to learn to work with new software. At the end of the day, we managed that, but it was a quite significant effort that went into that. Also because Thermo Fisher has quite a substantial footprint in the UK, and we have quite some entities to manage over there. I think secondly, if I look back, the big challenge that we had is that we started to roll out an in-house shared service center, a center of excellence, about 2 years ago. Many of our European finance tasks have been moved over into that shared service center. Now, we will always have divisions that are not part of that shared service center because of M&A activity. But that was a big thing for our company. The shared service center, if you zoom into that, it consists of two parts. One department handles the financial operations in Eastern Europe. That team takes care of the core AP and AR processes for a number of divisions. The other department is based in the UK and handles the compliance affairs for group entities. It's statutory compliance, corporate tax compliance, but also indirect tax compliance. So VAT returns, sales lists, Intrastat, the whole shebang. That center also has a dedicated VAT compliance manager and analysts that work for that person. They are independent from the corporate tax team that I am part of. They are really part of the Shared Service Center organization. But during projects, we of course work closely together. Good examples are the early adopter programs that we are involved in with Vertex. We always have that closely tied up with people in the VAT compliance team over in Paisley. Two of them are actually trained as experts and VAT super and Vertex super users, because they are the actual end users for that tool and have to work with it. But of course, if you can imagine, getting that shared service center delivered was a tremendous task. They had to recruit personnel, take in VAT return preparation processes, do work shadowing sessions. So it was a very, very busy time. But looking back, it was a tremendous task. But the team did a really great job delivering that center within a relatively short time frame. That's two of the main drivers that I would see for the past period.
Okay, thanks, Dan. And can you maybe also, because I believe that's relevant as well. What's your systems landscape? Do you run one ERP platform? Do you run multiple?
No, we run multiple systems really. I think it's somebody in IT sometimes mentioned we have pretty much 60, 70 different instances of ERP systems, SAP systems, the whole shebang. We have JD Edwards and SAP as the main ones, but it's a very diversified, challenging landscape. Thermo Fisher is a company, of course, that came together through a lot of acquisitions. Sometimes we move over to certain ERP systems, but in many places, the ERP landscape is still intact, and that makes it complex in quite some situations.
Okay, thanks, Dan.
Yeah, Dan, it's very interesting, right? You were mentioning the regulatory changes and making tax digital, and the rollout of a shared service center being the drivers of using a compliance solution such as the Vertex solution. But can you also explain a bit more about why did you choose Vertex to help solving the compliance challenges that you are facing here in Europe?
Yeah, well, I think it's closely connected to making tax digital. We had to rethink the compliance software. It was a big trigger. Of course, Vertex was no stranger to us. The team in the US already had been working with Vertex for a long time. But of course, you start looking at functional and technical specs at that moment. And as a corporate function, you really have to drive scalability. That's really one of the main deliverables that you have as a corporate function. So any platform that we would select had to meet that criterion. So it simply means that you have to have a tool that can pretty much handle any filing in Europe. It should be easily connectable to ERP systems. So we don't want to start building triggers, hard-coded triggers with ERP systems. You have to have flexibility to upload data files, that kind of stuff. And where possible, it really has to support e-filing functionality, just like we had in the UK. And again, we have a pretty scattered landscape. So hardwiring all kinds of system into an API, that's going to be a challenge. But having the flexibility to upload files, that's one of the main reasons. Next to that, of course, if you keep in mind that shared service center environment, you need to have a well-established name to deliver enough support functionality. There's a tremendous amount of VAT returns that needs to be delivered in a certain period. So if there are hiccups, then Vertex has to be a phone call away. So if you go for a bigger, well-established name, then you typically know that they have the staff to the level that, and that they can scale up where necessary. Next to that, it's also important in our IT landscape that a lot of software is hosted at the vendors. We really don't want to do that in-house anymore, so that we don't have to invest in updates, technical maintenance ourselves. So at the end of the day, we talked to multiple vendors, asked for quotes, looked at service support levels, asked for demos, and threw that all in the mix. And at the end of the day, we simply came to the conclusion that Vertex had the best price to quality ratio, simply said.
Okay, thanks, Dan.
Yeah, that's interesting. But how did you sell it to your stakeholders internally? How did you get this buy-in? Do you have any advice for people in the audience how to do that?
Well, I guess I'm in that sense a bit lucky because within Thermo Fisher it's just being a science and technology company. There's a good sensitivity already for the benefits that digitization may offer. Company really has recognized the trend that the authorities are catching up quite fast now when it comes to digital reporting requirements. That trend is really turned into legislation. It's really fairly easy to follow through on that. But if push comes to shove, I think you really need to make sure that you have the buy-in of the most important stakeholders, and that's the actual end user. You have to keep communicating that message to other stakeholders as well. Of course, you can end up in a pricing discussion then, but at the end of the day, that price-quality ratio is the most convincing item, I think. And next to that, I think it really helps if your vendor, like Vertex, really actively reaches out and involves you in all kinds of early adopter programs, because that really makes and shows the effort to understand that they want to understand what works and not for their customers, and that simply that builds trust. And last but not least, I think getting stakeholder buy-in for digital transformation will become easier. Obviously, the Corona crisis is a big driver for that. Everybody is learning as we speak more and more what works in practice and what not. Take, for example, the topic of e-invoicing. That is really being accelerated at the moment in a lot of countries, and just demonstrates the need for the actual digitization effort. If you don't invest in that anymore, then simply it will be more challenging to do business. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I believe we're moving to, let's say, indirect tax processes where you cannot afford to do things manually anymore, because the speed of the process will significantly increase, especially because of what you mentioned, the e-invoicing. It will all become real time or almost real time. So that's I expect it has a huge impact. But when you went through a whole selection process, you went to a change process, and ultimately you said, well, okay, we are going to deploy a digital compliance solution. And when doing that, I expect you would have certain expectations. But how does it impact your compliance process, and what are, let's say, the improvements that you have seen in this process when deploying the digital solution versus manual?
Well, I think, again, looking at that shared service center environment where we are actually preparing most of the returns nowadays, the biggest benefit is that they have a tool that they can use structurally to prepare VAT returns. It's a gradual process to get there, but at the end of the day, the ideal state is that you strip away Excel functionality. That's basically what you're trying to implement. You have the raw data files, you enhance them, and then you upload them in a tool and do all the preparation in that file. You really see that during the transition when you have to bring in, let's say, the tax return preparation worksheets in Excel to a shared service center environment from the local departments. Then, of course, the local team in the shared service center is confronted with a multitude of custom-made ad hoc sheets that they have to familiarize themselves with, and that is simply not a sustainable situation. So there was an effort made to standardize the worksheets, and next to that, in the next step, you have the possibility now with global returns to upload the raw data files and do the entire VAT return preparation in Vertex. Next to that, it also forces you to start working with workflows. If you are in that environment and you have to set out a lot of returns on a monthly basis, then it is important that you keep track of all these deadlines. Now, the compliance solution has a workflow built into it. The new release will also have an even fancier option there, which can also take away the need for an additional Excel sheet in which you actually track the status of the returns or additional software. So it brings the integration also in the process as such. I think if I had one thing on my wish list, it would be that, let's say, more and more countries would quickly adopt the actual e-filing through Vertex's API. Now you have, the UK, Germany, but the number of countries that actually has that adopted is, to my opinion, still relatively small. But as soon as you have that possibility, you actually have another lever to go for that more structural VAT return preparation through Vertex. Otherwise, you would have to prepare it in Vertex, and then, you would still have to, type in the final figures into some government portal. But if that happens more and more, and I'm pretty sure that it will at one point, then Vertex will really become the more or less the golden standard of every VAT return that is being prepared.
Yeah, makes sense, Dan. Thanks for that, and thanks also for putting that on the wish list.
And Dan, you mentioned, ideally moving away from Excel, right? I think that's a phrase I hear a lot, right? Having that VAT return preparation process also being automated as much as possible. You mentioned, right, running validations on your data and making sure that you get the data right before reporting it to the tax authorities. Could you maybe share some insights on how you use that VAT return preparation process, or what kind of tests are you running there on your data?
Yeah, so at the moment, the super users in our shared service center, they're examining which of the corrections and tests that they currently do in Excel can be implemented in the data integrity tool. So that's still with that tool, we are actually in a fairly early phase due to competing priorities at the moment. But the idea is that we will implement the data integrity tool together with the rollout of the new release of the global compliance tool. But of course, we have to stress that such data integrity tool is a very good fit for a shared service center organization. Right now, folks do that in Excel, and not everybody may have the same Excel maturity level. And although there are quite some advanced functions in Excel, the get and transform functions in Excel, they are much more detailed than as they are in the data integrity tool, whilst the underlying methodology is the same. So it is a little bit of a more friendly, easier to use interface. So once you get people to do that in the integrity tool rather than Excel, then that is also a standardization effort that you can realize in the shared service center. When you actually look at the the checks and validations that you can deploy without giving away too much detail. I think of completeness tests, logical checks, and destination checks. I think we can all understand the typical examples of missing VAT numbers for intercompany transactions that have to be plugged in manually. Of course, you can go to IT and ask to change that in the data tables, but it can be quite a challenge in a big company like ours to get that fixed in a minute, and that's why, of course, we have the data integrity tool built in the first place. Of course, there is a lot of interesting stuff that you can do with the lookup tables to expand expand the ranges and build more advanced check, tie elements together from different sources and master data for items, vendor and tax report data. And I think that next to that, it's also a good way to do simple checks on easier returns. So you can make combinations for, let's say, the 5 highest amounts that you want to have checked for documentation and that are already selected in that process. So it is a very good fit in a shared service center environment. But the deployment, at the moment also ties in with the expected go live of the global compliance solution, the new release.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned, right, having like completeness checks, logical checks, and destination checks, right? These are things you would typically do in Excel, right? And automating that in data integrity can be very easy set up. So that's great to hear, Dan. And in terms of you mentioned, right, that you use tax technology in many ways. What do you actually see as the plan for Thermo Fisher for the future, regarding your transformation journey?
Well, I guess keep checking the legislation surrounding digital reporting requirements is simply priority one. And we shouldn't forget that many of these digital reporting requirements have been around now for quite some time. After the financial crisis, some governments really started to digitize relatively quickly, and they have learned from that experience. So take a look at Poland, for example, where we have actually witnessed the end of the VAT return. And in Spain now the government has the real-time reporting in place now for a while, and is actually starting to experiment with pre-populated VAT returns. So it's likely that, these countries will enter a new phase of compliance where it's really going to be about explaining changes and keep maintaining your master data quality. So you need to clearly communicate it as a corporate function and raise awareness for that trend. These requirements have been around for a while now, and we might actually enter a new stage in some countries. Maybe also that nobody can predict the future, of course, but it's likely that at one point governments will also start to look for additional tax revenue in the post-corona era. So who knows? As a result, the number of audits may go up, and we need to be ready for that. Very likely these audits will be e-audits, where at the beginning of the audit process you'll be speaking to an EDP auditor in many more cases, who might ask you more questions about your technical landscape, your functional specs, these kind of things. So you need to have that documentation also ready and at hand, and to be able to speak to the auditors in a more technical way than you used to. Another trend that I think is visible is the further integration between SAFT reporting and VAT reporting. SAFT reporting, standard audit file tax, is typically a more granular periodic reporting table that you need to provide. But at one time that can actually tie in very nicely with the VAT reporting as such. That's what you also seen in Poland already. So with SAFT, my experience is that you will always need to have IT involved in these processes. So it's important that you timely get that on a roadmap, especially in bigger companies. It can take a while before that lands, and that you manage these projects very well. So these kind of projects also ask for different skills. So it's more of the project management skills that you need to have available in your tax function to deploy these projects. I think, last but not least, you really simply have to be open to technology as well, and an enabler for flexibility and scalability. It's really key that you get and take the chance to experiment with technologies. Also, in an in-house tax department, you more or less become a little bit more independent of your IT function. A good example could be, let's say, robotic process automation, RPA. There are definitely cases for that. So use cases, we all know that are repetitive tasks, but it is key that you really start working with these tools in the department and build practical experience. It's only then when you can really see the full potential of what that tool actually does. A presentation will simply not cut it. You really have to work with these tools to see what you can do with it.
Great, thanks Dan, for your insights.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. We have one of the questions is we're focusing now on the EU. You also mentioned the US, but what about LATAM? Do you have insights, or is that outside of your vision on how do you handle compliance reporting in South America?
Well, frankly, that's out of the scope of the European team. We have the team in the US typically taking also care of the Americas. So I'm not directly involved in the reporting landscape over there. But I do know, of course, that all these countries, they also are quite far ahead already with digital reporting requirements. It's often that you find the Western European tax authorities lagging behind what you see already happening in other countries. That's the experience that I have.
Okay, and Dan, there's also another question came in through the Q&A, and that's about the source data that is being used for your VAT returns and the other returns that we have across Europe. Is that data coming from your source systems, so the ERP systems? Do you have to customize these reports, or is that data coming from somewhere else?
Well, it's typically coming from your ERP system. That's the main source. Of course, you try to work with the standard functionality first. That's always what your IT department will ask you to do. If you really need additional data points, then you'll have to talk to your IT department to see if it's easy to add those if you want to do additional checks. Sometimes it's simple. Sometimes it's harder. What I've also learned is that tying together tables in an ERP system is really, not always as easy as you would expect. If you don't work on this on a daily basis. We've seen a couple of projects now, and IT folks can really see what it takes to actually develop that. I think one thing that you always see in practice is that you have to combine data points from different types of reports. So you have in the financial module, you have the standard issue tax report, but you can actually enrich that by, adding in items from your item master data files. And if you can even enhance that with data in your customer and vendor records, then you have a quite extensive file. But asking your IT department to build that's a combination of a lot of tables that need to be built together. Now, of course, you have Power Pivots and Power BI that can do a fantastic job already to exactly deliver that. So I think we should also invest more time into these tools because, well, a lot of that work that you would ask IT to do for you, tying these tables together, can already be done with tools that you can have in your own finance and tax orbit. And again, the data integrity tool can also be of a great help if you want to tie these tables together and then simply enrich the reports and the number of data points that you can test. Hope that answers the question a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Dan. I have another question coming in, and I'll answer that one. It's a question around e-filing capabilities and safety reporting. So from a Vertex perspective, e-filing and safety is indeed supported in our solution. Safety, I do want to make the caveat there. We support the VAT related and the periodic safety reports, right? So Dan mentioned the poly safety report. That is an example of a safety report that has, it's simply replacing the VAT return. It's periodic and it's VAT data. In other countries, there are also safety requirements, but it can be broader than just simple VAT data. It's often upon request by the tax authorities. So those safety reports we do not support, but all periodic VAT related safety reports we indeed cover.
Hey Dan, there's a few questions that are related to let's say the volume of your deployment in Europe. So how many countries are covered by the solution? How much effort did it take on your end to implement? And how long was your UAT period in your transition?
Well, let's say take making tax digital as the example. On a general note, we have a presence pretty much all over the place. So in every European country, we will have something, some legal entities around that need to do a filing, except for the smallest countries in the EU. There we typically have a branch office or so. But when you look at the actual implementation of making tax digital, it took about a year and a half to get the data files ready, to train the people. We did that in cooperation with an outside party, to deliver the training and the actual implementation. But yeah, let's say in the UK you have about maybe 30 to 50 entities that you need to address, and that was in a large part still in the time that we were not in a shared service center environment. So there was a more diversified landscape in place back then, which was more challenging. But if you would have to do that now, you really have the benefit again of having everything already in a shared service center and being able to scale up and roll out the reporting to other countries as well. And again, I think if the e-filing functionality in a lot of countries is adopted, that's really the main trigger. If that is possible, then you can really, pretty much prescribe Vertex as the main standard to be used.
That's quite an essential additional feature that you need. One of the related questions to this is, given your current situation and given let's say the e-file requirement, did you assess any return on investment with respect to this deployment? Did it facilitate anything? Or
We haven't done really the calculations for the number of hours that it takes. I imagine that will come into to place at one point of time. Of course, our shared service center will have KPIs in place to measure that. But I think if you zoom out and you look at the overall price quality ratio that Vertex could offer, it really wasn't a big discussion with the business. At the end of the day, they still get a charge for the number of returns that they have done via the shared service center. And if you look at the overall picture, it was not too difficult to convince the business of the business case. So I think that's a good sign. But I do agree that at one point you will definitely have to come up with a more advanced measure of measuring the amount of work that goes into the tax return preparation. But that's not at the stage where the shared service center is at the moment when you look at VAT returns.
Okay, and did you save anything on advisory or compliance fees from external providers, or was it also not a relevant aspect?
Well, when you have, of course, an in-house tool, then the expectation is that you start doing returns yourself. And so, indeed, you will have the push towards, in-house VAT return preparation. So savings have been, realized there. Simply take a look at making tax digital. If you wouldn't have had that shared service center and the technology around, you would have to go outside to actually have somebody do that for you. So that saving as such is definitely there. I think the biggest challenge really is maybe in the more exotic countries, when you obviously need to build language skills, you need to have a certain technical expertise about the legislation. We typically have a mix of working with outside consultants where we have to. But of course, when there is a shared service center organization, there is an expectation that you do prepare returns in-house. Yeah. Hope that answers it.
Yeah, to me it makes sense, Dan, absolutely. So thanks for that. And you mentioned data integrity as the source for VAT reporting. How is that integrated and built into into the solution?
Well, right now it's to a large extent working with Excel, and the data integrity tool is under investigation. So people know how to use it, but the question there is how do you deploy it to the wider audience? When we are in the early adopter program, we've seen the tool, people have been trained, so the technical knowledge is there, but it's really who has to maintain the system. Can that knowledge be transferred to the wider group to build these logical checks in the data integrity tool? That's where we are at the moment. That can be done. I'm totally convinced of that because it is much more intuitive than Excel. But at the moment, it's simply a matter of priorities. So as soon as we have a couple of other priorities off the table, then we will definitely be looking into the further rollout of the digital reporting and the integrity tool.
Makes sense, Dan. So it's still at quite an early stage within your company, is my understanding.
Correct. The folks that know about it in the shared service center, they've seen it. They know how it works, but it's simply a matter of time about the deployment.
Yeah, okay, thanks. I believe we've covered all of the questions. So thanks, Dan, for these insights. And I think it's very interesting. I would like to hand it over now to Neela again.
Great. So I would like to thank, thank our presenters today. So that's Peter, Ellen, and Daniel. And I'd like to thank everyone that attended our session as well. Any questions that we were unable to answer, I've seen one or two come in just now, and we will get back to you by email. Please also note that we do have an exchange episode, our next one, where we'll be speaking about eBay, about the VAT 2021 changes. So for more information about that, please visit our website. Thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.